Nigeria's inflation rate has continued to rise, with the consumer price index increasing to 33.95% in May 2024, a significant jump from the 33.69% recorded in April 2024. Now, this rise in inflation is attributed to a combination of factors, including the ongoing economic challenges and issues, supply chain disruptions, and the impact of global economic downturn. These developments, however, sparked concerns amongst analysts and economists about the country's economic stability. Well, let's get talking, and I'm being joined this afternoon by a development economist, Professor Ken Ife. Prof, good afternoon and happy Salah to you.
And happy Salah too.
Thank you so much, Prof. Inflation figures came up over the weekend, and specifically, it's at 33.95% from this month, from 33.69% in the month of April 2024. The increase is about 0.26 percent points, but make us to understand what you still see about this shift on the high side of inflation in Nigeria.
Well, it's quite small actually, and the relative to last year is 11.54% above the corresponding period in the last 12 months. And the same increase is seen across all the five inflation indicators, indices. You have the headline inflation, which is CPI. You have the core inflation. You have the food sub-basket index. You have the rural inflation and the urban inflation. All of them showed rise compared to the same period last year, 12 months ago. But the story changes quite dramatically when you look at month to month. Last month, the month to month from the previous showed a decline, a slight decline, even though there's still an increase, but it shows a relative decline in that rate of increase. But this month, compared to last month, actually showed a decrease in absolute terms. So there is a decrease of 0.15% on the headline inflation, and similarly, minus 0.22 on the food sub-basket index. And as you go down to core inflation, minus 0.18, and then urban inflation minus 0.32. Is only in the rural that it stays the same. Is showed a little increase, 0.02, which is negligible. So it sends a clear signal that yes, we are still experiencing high interest rate compared to 12 months ago, but the steam is going off. Measures are taken out, are sucking out the oxygen from the rate of inflation. Why we can see this in the figures, it's difficult to see it in the market, because when I went to market last week and 2 weeks and even 2 days ago, tomato that I was buying 3,000 naira a basket is now 18,000 naira a basket. The pepper from 3,000 to 15,000 and 12,000. So it is dramatic, because I had thought that would hit the food sub-basket index. But then there are many indicators, there are many indices in the food sub-basket index. So that vegetable is just one of them. So they may have been overtaken by the others. But this is the reality. The reality is that if this pace continues for the next 3 months, we may now translate to significant drop in the headline figures.
The implication of this to vis-a-vis what the central bank has been doing, inflation targeting, and of course trying to also rein in inflation. Before we go again deep into this, would you say that we're beginning to see some positives out of all of these policies instituted?
No, bearing in mind that there are so many parameters affecting inflation. It's not one, it's not two, it's not three, it's not four. There are many. You know, the monetary side is only a fraction of it. The monetary side assumes that there is so much money in circulation and then tries to suck it out using open market operation, using sales of bills, treasury bills, and all of that to suck money out. But they are sucking money out, presumably, primarily from the banking sector, that you have actually, there's nothing left there anymore. and then some private sector that are interested in buying bills, and maybe some. So, but remember that nearly 40% of the unbanked category means that their money is not available to transmission of monetary policies. And then also, if you look at the informal traders, the whole and then the cross-border circulation of money. So they are not really amenable to monetary policy as such. So what you do, and Nigeria is not a credit economy in the sense of Western world. Credit economy means consumer credit is pervasive in those countries. So once you have an increase in monetary policy rate, immediately the banks will reprice their assets, and then you now get an increase immediately on your repayment of your mortgage, the monies you are owing, the credit cards, all of them, and the people who are borrowing every minute, that they will start slowing down. That's not the case for Nigeria. So that policy has its own limitations. But then when you also look at structural factors which are more on the fiscal side, then you see insecurity. What can you do about insecurity? The only thing is to stop it, to tackle it, but there's nothing you can do. The damages it has on food, food production, food distribution, is so pervasive. And then, of course, there are many others like energy costs that are going. Electricity increased by 250%. What would you say about that? I would even thought that it could also affect the inflation in a much more dramatic way than it has. It's just that electricity is just one of the utilities indices. So it gets swallowed up by other utility indices that are likely to trend down or steady. So and then you also have the petrol and you have the diesel. The diesel is come down. So that also, you have things going up, some coming down. And then you got the currency that has come down to 1,000. It's now back to 1.5, 1.4 thousand. So there is a mixed bag in that respect. So there are many things, but a lot of it are outside the monetary, to be honest.
So obviously the fiscal side has a major role to play in reining on inflation. But let's look at what people are saying now. It's Salah season and everyone is saying prices of ram, rice, tomatoes, onions, everything is so much on the high side. Pepper and all of this. We hear all of this. So moving on, would we still continue to see this figure rising? When are we hopeful of trying to see inflation now start to taper down, following the rightful moves being made, of course, now by the fiscal and the monetary side?
If you look at the three items in that inflation basket, that is, if you look at the actual rise, what are the items? Food and non-alcoholic accounts for 17.59%. Yeah, and then you have the housing and water. And these utilities coming in at 5.6%. And when you now add clothing and footwear all together, they now come to about 28%. The issue now is how quickly can you take them down? That's the problem. Food is run away because it's been cruising at over 40%. And so it's difficult to bring the food down. If you look at the GDP figures on food, agriculture was only 0.18% growth rate. That's abysmal because the population growth rate is 3%, 2.8 to 3%. So how can you be growing food far, far lower than the population growth rate? And the urbanization growth rate is 4.6%. So which is many, many times more than the rate at which you are growing the food. And you can understand why urban sub-index is so much higher than even the core inflation. And the urban sub-index is 36.34%, much higher than the CPI, which is 33%. So it shows that the significant theater for this inflation is in the urban area. And then obviously, when you look at urban vis-a-vis the rural, transportation cost weighs in between the two. So you still see rural, lower, but subject to different variables that play very much more on the state level rather than on the national level.
So, Prof, in all of this conversation, we see Labour obviously coming up with the issue of new minimum wage, living wage. That's what they say they want, and we expect that to be passed to the Assembly from the President very soon. When that happens, many say there's also going to be an effect on inflation. Can you make us understand that?
No, without a doubt, there will be a major impact. Let me even say this. You cannot escape not doubling or tripling this minimum wage. You can't escape minimum double. You can't escape that, because not only that the minimum wage is impacted, but you now scale up other salaries related to the minimum wage. So there will be more money to be paid out. Now that's number one. Then number two is market people will already harvest their own minimum wage the moment the announcement is made. They will immediately double the price of goods, because it's like a Debo award in the 70s. The moment the announcement was made, prices jumped 200%. People in the market say they're getting their own award. So it's no longer about exchange rate and forex and all that. They are saying there is an award, they want to get their own. So they will hike the prices, they will hold back, they will hoard goods to push prices up, and they will go through all that. But after a little while, government may be forced to do some import immediately, because you have to challenge some of those. Even if it is not importing food as such, we can import rice paddies and then give it to the millers to mill. So in that way, you are reducing the. But there are other things that will happen, are currently happening. We are buying food. When you look at palliatives, some of these palliatives and some of the money coming in to buy food, they go to the same market that me and you go to and buy these things. So what you are doing is that there is that pressure on the food, because they are buying the same from the same theater. That's where they are buying the food that they are giving to some of the IDPs and all of that. And then secondly, I keep on saying about the cross-border demand pool of inflation, which is caused by the currency differential. If your currency is 80% down and relative to all the francophone, obviously your food is very cheap. They don't need to go to farm anymore. They just keep buying your food. Even if you like, you can double the price, they are still going to be 40% cheaper. They will still be buying it. So, and they have a much higher elasticity of demand at those frontiers. So this is some of the things, and the number of people involved are about 100 million. If you count all those countries surrounding us, francophone, and their currency is so strong, not for any reason except that it is artificial, that the French government pegged their CFA to euro, and they keep burning their reserves to maintain it. They hold 80% of their reserves, so they are burning it to maintain that value, that high value. How can a currency stay at the same rate for 8-9 years? It's inconceivable. It's just because of that particular thing. So we see the effect on our own side, and we are not a monetary authority that can influence them. And then we have ECOWAS treaty that protects those cross-border transactions. Unless you do value addition, then they will have to now go to ECOWAS trade liberation scheme, which is ETLS, that makes them pay duty of one form or the other, unless they can satisfy the rule of origin. So there are circumstances there. I know people don't talk about those, but these are insidious situations that continue to keep food sub-basket index at that high level, and they just don't care, And insecurity, of course, messes up the entire situation. That even if you mechanize, the women will still have to go out to go and get the food or to go and plant the crop, and they are challenged. There are 80% of the production, there are 80% of the local processing, and there are 80% of the local sales of the goods in the market. So you can't ignore the role of women in this agro food supply equation.
Well, interesting conversation. Prof, I must thank you so much for your time. Thank you for
But there are other issues you haven't touched, which is the things going on in the States.
Yes, yes.
We have four inflation zones.
Prof, allow me, we can wrap up on that note. Let's wrap up with the states and, of course, interventions that should also be coming from them at this time. FARC is on the high side. Can we wrap up on that note?
Yes, you see, we have four inflation zones in the country. We have the Lakaji corridor, which is Lagos, Kaduna, Kanu, all the way to Gimbiwa. That is Lakaji corridor. It's a high inflation zone. That's why if you look at the inflation figures at the state, they are always perpetually high. Kogi State is in the middle, Kwara State is in the middle. All of them are high, all the way to Kaduna, all the way to Kanu. And it's because of the interplay of imported goods going up north, which is carrying imported inflation, and then the food are coming down south and carrying a very high transportation costs. But if you look at the corridor, the coastal corridor, you have a moderate inflation because all of them have seaports. So they're all playing the same game on imported inflation. So they're all. But you look at the northern, the southern corridor, the eastern corridor from Port Harcourt, Enugu, going Makurdi, going up there. There's a food zone there, and then you have low inflation rates engineered by Benue. Benue is the food basket of the country. But then the northern borders, the northern frontier borders, also have medium inflation rate because they are all producing food that are struggling to come down south, rather than heading out to the neighboring countries.
Well, it's a good way to live it. I must thank you so much, development economist Professor Kenife. Thank you for starting the week with us on Business Nigeria. We appreciate this. Do enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you for having me.